Welcome. I'm David Dworkin. I'm President and CEO of the National Housing Conference, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all here, those of you who are here today in person and those of you who are watching online. This is our Solutions for Housing Communications convening, and we've been doing this for, I think, about 10 years now, and we're thrilled to have you here. It is the only convening nationally that brings together housing communications experts from around the country to talk about the issues around promoting and communicating and marketing housing policy. So I'm really appreciative. It has been quite a wild week in the economy, and I had never heard of Silicon Valley Bank until Friday, and I was sure Silicon Valley had a bank. I didn't know I would ever need to know what it was. But apparently I was at dinner last night with a bunch of guys, and one of them was like, yeah, my startup had all their money in Silicon Valley Bank. And I spent, all weekend worrying what will we do with literally no money. And then, of course, on Monday, found out, well, their deposits are protected, and their payroll was protected, so they kind of dodged that bullet. But there is a lot going on still. There's a lot to come. We don't know exactly what it is, and I'm going to be talking about that a little more later. But it's for housers, I think there's some real impacts. This is more of an old-fashioned crisis where housing and community development is hurt by an economic crisis rather than causing one. So I guess we should be grateful for that. But we are going to have some impact on this, and we'll see how that plays out over the weeks and months ahead. Amy Scott's going to be here, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And for those of you who listen to Marketplace, either the podcast or in a car, people of a certain age, listen to it in their car on a radio, and the rest of you may hear it on your podcast. So this is going to be a great day. We've got a great set of panels. Really incredible intellectual capital we bring together here, but that wouldn't be possible without our financial capital and the support that we get from people like, or institutions like JPMorgan Chase. And they are our presenting sponsor today, and we're going to hear soon from Merceda Mortazavi, the Vice President of Global Philanthropy at JPMorgan Chase. And we just wouldn't be able to put on these kinds of convenings without the kind of support we've gotten from our funders. JPMorgan Chase has been our really most reliable and most generous supporter over the years, and we really appreciate that. And particularly the kind of work that we do with them. At NHC, every member has one vote. So if you're an emerging leader of affordable housing and you're paying $50 a year, you get one vote. If you're JPMorgan Chase and you've got 5 people at our meeting, maybe 6, you get one vote. And that kind of democracy really makes our very broad coalition work. But we also really depend not just on financial capital, but intellectual capital. And that's where I think helps us have our unique impact because of the broad range of intellectual capital we bring to the table. When we talk to policymakers, as well as the unusual diversity. We were founded as the unlikely coalition, and that is certainly true today. And I know that when we sent the letter in 2021 arguing for the Homeowner Assistance Fund, one of the things that really caught the eye of the Biden administration and forced them to do pretty much a 180 in their first day or days in office was the fact that they looked at this letter with all these signatures of organizations, and they were like, some of these people are suing each other, and they're still on this letter. And so that's, I think, the head-turning concept that we try to generate to say, yeah, you know what? People disagree about a lot of things in this country, but we agree on more than you think. And that was certainly the theme we had in our recent White House meetings. Again, with a very broad range of people sitting around the table in the Roosevelt Room and having a perfectly civilized conversation about things we don't agree on and having a really passionate conversation about the things we do. And I think that is how things can work. It's been an honor for NHC to be a part of that, partly because, as I like to say, it's good to be a centrist today because there's so little competition. So we also have several other sponsors here who have been very supportive of us. Manufactured Housing Institute, Podville Media are sponsoring some of our panel discussions today. Looking forward to that. And of course, Rocket Mortgage, my hometown lender in Detroit, is sponsoring our reception this evening, and that will be a lot of fun. It's at the Hamilton, so it's just kitty corner from here, and it's a great venue and a lot of fun. We're going to have a nice time tonight. And then we also have representatives from HUD and the OCC who are going to be on panels today. Really looking forward to hearing from them. And we just appreciate all the work that our panelists and our moderators put into all of this. I also, as I mentioned, I'm going to be having a fireside chat with Amy Scott. Appreciate her joining us. And then last but certainly not least, I want to recognize and thank our NHC staff for all of your work. It's really been incredible putting together the staff, getting to know all of you, working together as a team. I think we have the best team we've ever had at NHC, ever in our history. So that's just 92 years, but maybe we'll do better next year. But right now, you know, this is number one in 92. And that's Whitney Sarkoty, Brittany Webb, Erica Ramirez, Owen Posnet, who's the intern that never went away, thank God, and Demetria Brown and Amanda Mitchell, and of course our newest addition to our team, our Senior Policy Director, Charles Lowry. And people often ask me, well, how on earth did you get Charles to join NHC? And I was like, you know what, sometimes it's just better to be lucky than good. So with that, it's now my pleasure to introduce Merceda Mortazavi. She's Vice President, as I said, of Global Philanthropy at JP Morgan Chase, which is a global leader dedicated to driving inclusive economic growth in communities worldwide. JP Morgan Chase has made a commitment to invest $2 billion over 5 years to strengthen workforce systems, strengthen neighborhoods, grow small businesses, and improve the financial health of individuals. An investment that is part of the firm's $30 billion racial equity initiative, and wherever you come from, that is real money. Merceda is responsible for helping establish and execute the firm's national philanthropic strategies on neighborhood development, a $400 million 5-year portfolio focused on affordable housing connected to economic opportunities. She also manages large-scale national initiatives, including the Pro Neighborhoods Competition and Advancing Cities Challenge, aimed at advancing solutions that tackle major social and economic challenges across the country. So with that, please welcome Merceda Mortazavi. Thank you so much for being here, Merceda.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you, David. Thank you, NHC. As David mentioned, I'm Merceda Mortazavi. I lead our affordable housing philanthropic portfolio at JP Morgan Chase. And David, you articulated the moment and the reason we're all here today so well. The panel speakers and conversations today are so important as we work together across nonprofit, private, public sectors to really address the nation's housing challenges. And housing affordability issues are complex. On top of that, everyone in this room is advancing really interesting, innovative new solutions that tackle systemic barriers in an even more complex political environment. And that's really why this event is so important, and I know we'll walk away with new tools and ideas. Just to give a little background on JP Morgan Chase, David mentioned a little bit about the work that we do, but we are really dedicated to be part of the solution with you by addressing the structural challenges we continue to see today. And we're taking a firm-wide approach to do this, which includes a $30 billion commitment to advance racial equity. Majority of that is actually focused on increasing the supply of affordable housing and access to home ownership through our business products and services. And 2 years ago, we got a little bit more brass tacks. through policy, research, and philanthropic investments, which included a $400 million 5-year commitment and data-driven housing policy recommendations to improve housing stability and affordability for households of color. As part of our philanthropic commitment, we aim to push systems change at both the local and national level. We are testing innovations that can inform a national agenda, but also go deep in cities to build out comprehensive local strategies. Many of the topics we will be hearing from today are very top of mind for us, from building coalitions to supporting our partners in articulating what manufactured and offsite construction is and can be. And you'll hear more from my colleague during the racial equity panel. We know that an inclusive economy in which there is equal access to opportunity is a stronger, more resilient economy. And so once again, big thank you to NHC for the partnership, the ongoing partnership, for bringing us together today, and for the leadership in this work. We appreciate you.
So what I'd like to do now is take some time before we go into our employer-assisted housing presentation. I was at the Mortgage Bankers Association midwinter last week and talked about the housing market, housing supply. We've been having a lot of conversations with White House staff and with HUD. And then over the weekend, there was a lot of back and forth between us and the administration on Silicon Valley Bank and how that's impacting housing right now. And I just want to say, if you're watching online or you're here and you know your institution has issues that directly result from Silicon Valley Bank, I really want to know that, because I've been asked to help put together a list of some of the issues that need to be addressed. There's obviously the immediate short-term liquidity crisis, but there's also the kind of broader issue of how housing is impacted. I know the Secretary and Deputy Secretary are very interested in that, as are others. So we're going to go through this, and I've updated it to include SVB. So let's go to the first slide. And people are like, well, how could this have happened? I mean, what is this all about? And, you know, the unfortunate fact is it shouldn't really be a surprise. And the reason is because we have a really serious duration gap problem in many financial institutions that are not very, very expert and sophisticated in how they're hedging their interest rate risk. So I've just said a lot. I'm going to unpack that a little bit. What this chart is goes back to 2008, and what it shows is the unrealized gains or losses on investment securities. And that is basically a snapshot of the duration gap that exists in a book of fixed rate securities. And so what does that mean? If you are going to buy a bond, and that bond is worth 3%, is the coupon on the bond is 3%. And the coupon is simply the interest rate. And I love the fact that when we talk about a coupon, it's like this, where did this term come from? When I was at Treasury, in the basement there, they had this display of all these original bonds going back to like 150 years, and there's the principal portion of the bond, how much you're borrowing, and then at the bottom is like a sheet of stamps, and every single one of those stamps is the monthly amount you're paying in interest, and each one of those is a coupon. And so when you send in your check to or maybe in the 1800s, your little bag of gold, to cover the payment for the interest rate, that's the coupon. And so you clip the coupon just like you would a coupon, except that if you're a millennial, you don't even know what that is. But anyway, I'm explaining this to Gen Xers and boomers right now. The rest of you will have to Google it. But so the coupon is the interest rate, and the coupon is fixed, right? And so it's 3%. And that's great. But if I'm going to sell that bond, okay, and interest rates are 3%, I'm going to get about par, same thing. If I'm going to sell it and interest rates have gone down to 2%, and I'm selling you a 3% bond with payments that are based on 3%, well, you're going to pay more for that. That makes sense, because I like that 3% return. But if interest rates go to 6%, which they have now, and I want to sell that bond, I got a problem because it's not worth what I paid for it anymore. It's worth significantly less. And, generally the market right now, that's probably around 20% less. This means that when I'm holding that bond, if I'm marking it to market, what it's actually worth today, when I'm figuring out how much money I actually have in assets, then I have to adjust for that. And that bond is going to be worth less on my balance sheet. And that means that I've got less money. And if I'm a bank and I'm taking deposits and making loans and people are showing up and saying, hey, I've got $250 million in my account, I'd like to make a deposit of $190 million, that's a problem. Not a problem for most banks, because most banks don't have people who put $250 million in your account. But if you're at SVB in Silicon Valley and your business is startups who are getting massive amounts of venture capital and are not making any money, so are constantly making huge withdrawals, then 97% of SVB's depositors had deposits well over $250,000. This is not your father's typical savings and loan, but the same rules apply. So they've got this is actually not SVB. This is the entire mortgage and this is the entire banking industry. This is FDIC's chart from February 28th, and what it shows is that this duration risk, collapses in the beginning of Chair Powell's effort to increase interest rates and turn around inflation. And so you can see every month it gets worse and worse and worse. And now you're looking at unrealized losses. That means that losses that I have in an accounting sense, but only if I have to actually cash that in, if I have to sell those losses. So they're unrealized losses of $620.4 billion in the fourth quarter. And that is the truck that SVB found themselves under. Now, most banks manage their interest rate risk very carefully. And they think about it in terms of two things. SVB was really thinking about it in terms of one, credit quality and interest rate risk. And they're different. They're completely different. So SVB was thinking, we've got all of this high risk, investments in startups. This is our business. We know how to do this. We know how to analyze this risk. But we need a lot of safe business to actually offset that. So we're going to hedge our credit risk with mortgage-backed securities and treasury bonds. That makes perfect sense, except that only if you only went through your first semester of Economics 101. In your second semester, you may learn that interest rate risk is completely different than credit risk. And when you're actually taking less credit risk because you're buying all these long-term fixed rate assets, you've got a problem. And your problem is that you're exposed to interest rate risk. And this time, I think, in this crisis, anybody who says 2008 in the same sentence as what's going on today, you can just assume they know nothing about what they're talking about. There's nothing in common here with 2008. We could spend an hour talking about all the things that are not the same. But if you're of a certain age, not totally unrelated to what happened in the first S&L crisis in the 70s. And what you have is a new set of mistakes that we've been making. And so your typical bank is not going to have the kind of exposure that SVB had, but some of them do have, particularly smaller ones, which is why you're seeing this with regional and some community banks, unbalanced balance sheets of long-term fixed rate loans and securities that now are at risk. And that's the concern. This is why, 4 banks got halted in trading on Friday, and, we're looking at a couple of these banks. And the fear is that if there's a more generalized panic, if consumers get freaked out irrationally, because that's kind of the definition of panic, that what we're going to end up with is more and more people going to their bank asking for more and more money to withdraw, and that is going to put more pressure on what was a well-hedged portfolio and make it less well-hedged, and ultimately could lead to a crisis. And that's the contagion piece. That's the thing that the Treasury Secretary keeps saying she's worried about, is the contagiousness. So that's where we're at right now, and I think it bears a lot of watching. It's not over yet. It does not mean that it's a full-blown systemic crisis. I think that the Fed and the Treasury Department and FDIC did a really good job this weekend of managing where we're at. But I will say, they do not get a pass on missing this chart in the FDIC's book on, 2 weeks ago, and to say, hey, we saw this coming all last year. What did we have to prepare for it? Where are we going now? And I think those are really fair questions to ask of these regulators. Let's go to the next chart, and we can see here. So I love this chart for two reasons. On the left is SVB's exposure to mortgage-backed securities, and on the right is their peer group. And, I don't know how many people here remember the movie The Big Short, but in The Big Short, they use a Jenga puzzle to explain the complexity of a mortgage-backed security and the derivatives and the CMOs and all these different structures that have all these layers of risk and everything. That was a great scene in the movie. I often use it to explain the 2008 crisis to people. This is not a Jenga puzzle. This is Legos. This is like one Lego and 6 Legos. And this is a very simple mismatch of risk. And you think, how could a modern organization with a reasonably competent credit risk manager make a mistake like this? Well, apparently they didn't even have a credit risk officer. So they were in between. So it's I know it's hard to hire and find people who come into work more than once a month, but if you're going to be a $1 trillion bank, I think it's probably reasonable for you to have a credit risk officer. So let's look at housing in the next slide. What are some of the issues that what we're hearing from our members, people are really looking at and worried about today? First thing is, are existing debt obligations like construction loans wiped out with the bondholders, or are they preserved with the depositors? This is a really important question. This means if I am building a nonprofit, if I'm a nonprofit housing developer and I'm building a apartment building of 300 units in the Bay Area, and I have a construction loan, they don't just give me, $80 million up front to do this loan. They'll give it to me and say a $5 million draw, and then I'll get to a certain place and they'll give me some more money and I'll continue with the project there. These construction draws are pretty typical. And if I'm in the middle of construction and I got my last draw from SVB 3 weeks ago and I've got one that I need next week, I got a problem because I don't know if that draw is actually being treated as a bond agreement and getting wiped out along with the bondholders and the shareholders, or it's being treated as a deposit. It's kind of in between. What we believe that is, so here's just my personal opinion that I really hope is wrong, is I'm afraid that it's going to be wiped out because in all the FAQs the FDIC has put out so far, they have not addressed this. They've really kind of passed over it, and they've been very, very clear about how they're defining depositors and who's protected, and it's not included yet. And so I am hoping they will honor these draws. I think it's really important. The other component of this is that if you have a LIHTC deal where SVB bought your low-income housing tax credit and you're getting the equity from that deal and it has not been placed in service yet, your LIHTC credits are at risk. Now, that does not mean that you aren't going to be able to do your deal. What it does mean is you're going to have to get a new construction loan and you're going to have to get new LIHTC equity. And they're going to be priced based on the current economy and the current market, and you're going to have a gap. That is the difference between what you thought it was going to cost and what it's costing now. That means you're going to either have to use your own operating funds, or you're going to have to get some more subsidy dollars, or you're going to have to decide not to do the deal. Give it to somebody else, and that's a problem. And we don't know the answers to that, and what we've been encouraging the Secretary and the White House staff and others to really focus on right now is what are we going to do with this? They had to solve this crisis over the weekend, but now they need to be thinking about all these other components, and that's an important part of it. How will the construction loans be funded so we can get deals moving? Do I just have to go back out to the market, or can I actually go to a facility that you could set up, or somebody could set up that would say, okay, we're going to come in and we're going to fill that. We're going to cover your next draw while you're getting new financing, or we're going to take over this loan, and even though it's at a lower rate, somehow it's going to be covered by somebody or by us. And number 3 is, do we need any special permissions to replace SVB as our limited partner? That's going to be really important in LIHTC. And then finally, do we need extensions from the state treasurer or from the IRS on our placed in service deadlines to accommodate any delays? So these are 4 of the questions that I think that our members are really looking at right now, and there may be many others. And and I think, for regulators, like I say, focus over the last 4 days has been systemic risk. But right now, we really need to be looking at is all of the ancillary risk, and the impact on affordable housing development and construction is one of them, in part because it's important to maintain this capacity, but also because, our inflation problem is significantly impacted by shelter costs, and our shelter costs are driven by a supply shortage. And so these things are all tied together, as they always are in an economy. So if we go to the next slide, you can see here, this is just a look at housing inflation. This is the shelter component of core CPI. That's the red line, and the blue line, and the red line is the 30-year fixed rate mortgage. And so what you see here is that mortgage rates have started to come down a little bit, even though the Fed is trying to keep them up. We're going to see this trend continue. The short-term rate, if the Fed raises rates 25 basis points, I think it'll be tomorrow. Is it tomorrow their decision, or today? They're meeting today and tomorrow, I think. And so let's say they go with 25 basis points. That's not going to have a heck of a lot of impact on long-term rates, because the long-term rates are being really governed by this crisis and liquidity issues that are out there. And so, they're on a treadmill, and the supply problem is moving that treadmill faster, so they have to run faster. And now you've got another factor going on, which is the actual long-term rates and its impact on shelter, which is the one component of CPI that was unresponsive in the last release yesterday, I think it was. And so this is a very complex problem, and the challenge is, Senator Warren likes to say the Fed has one tool in their toolbox, and she is not wrong about that. They have a lot of other complex tools and opportunities, but if you just boil it down to its most simple, sense, it's pretty much, like having 7 really cool hammers in your toolbox and no screwdrivers. And you're like, can I use the back of that hammer as a screwdriver? So it's, I'm sure everybody in the Fed Board of Governors would hate me for saying that, but it's my story and I'm sticking with it. And there's also this issue of a double-edged sword where both edges are dull. And they're a lot more dull now than they were last week. The other thing about this chart, I'll say, is that it's a really good chart when you talk about the importance of housing in the context of inflation. And pretty much you can put that in any deck that you're advocating for more money for housing supply. Throw that chart in the deck or make your own, and you can tie everything we're doing now to inflation, because it is. And then finally, I want to talk about the impact of all of this on, go to the next slide, on first-time home buyers. And what we're seeing is the disappearance of the first-time home buyer market. We also have issues with the move-up market because of low rates, and we'll talk about that separately. But when we talk about first-time home buyers, all of our efforts at racial equity are really tied to the availability and affordability of housing for first-time and first-generation home buyers. And what we see here on the right side is the monthly median home price. and the average interest rate. And the interest rate, I've got here at 7%. We were right around 7% last week. Now I think it's coming down as a result of some of the things I talked about. That's up from 3.31. That's more than twice as much. And then when you look at the median home price in 2019, just before the pandemic, you can see it was at $274,600, up to $391,000 today. And on the left, what you see is the monthly payment that has resulted from the change in interest rate and the increase in housing prices. So how practical an impact is this? Well, in 2019, the typical monthly payment was $1,357 a month, and you needed $54,200 in income to buy a median-priced home. That was in 2019. Today, that $1,357 payment has gone to $2,773, and the income needed to buy that exact same home in the person with the exact same job making $54,200, they actually need now to make $111,000 a year. So that is a real problem. And to compound that problem, and you can see here that, in the next slide, this is the availability of new housing. In that red section going back to January of 2002 at the bottom, those are homes priced under $200,000 a year. And they were over half of the market in January of 2002. And today, they are almost none of the market. They almost don't exist anymore in any market in terms of new housing. If you go up to $300,000 a year, $300,000 home sale price, you can see there they were 80% of the market in 2002. And today, they're significantly less than 20% of the market. And so this is a real crisis for us in terms of housing affordability, but especially in terms of how do we expand home ownership. And, over the pandemic, we saw really, I think somewhat unexpected, but really encouraging signs of increase in the home ownership rate for Black Americans, for Hispanic Americans, for Asian and Pacific Islander Americans. And we've made some progress we don't want to lose, but this is making it a lot harder. And there's only one answer to this problem, and that is more product. We need more housing that's affordable to more people, and if we don't build it, we're not going to get it. So that's the story, and I'm looking forward